Hello and welcome to Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. I'm Ian Masters, and today we'll examine a number of stories and issues in the news. We'll begin with more evidence that the 25th Amendment should be under consideration as Trump unloads a demented rant on Truth Social, warning Canada if they make a trade deal with China, the first thing the Chinese will do is, quote, terminate all ice hockey being played in Canada and permanently eliminate the Stanley Cup. Joining us from Canada is Stephen Marche, a novelist and culture writer who has written for The Atlantic, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, The New Yorker, Esquire, and many other outlets. His recent books include The Next Civil War, Dispatches from the American Future, and The Last Election, co-authored with Andrew Yang. Then we'll assess the hearing today before the House Homeland Security Committee, at which the heads of ICE and CBP faced tough questions from Democrats, and the Republican head of the committee, who, needless to say, like all Republicans, voted to give DHS $170 billion, ICE $75 billion, and CBP $58 billion. Joining us is Lindsay Koshgarian, the Program Director of the National Priorities Project, where she oversees nationalpriorities.org. Her work on the federal budget includes analysis of the federal budget process and politics, military spending, and specifically how federal budget choices for different spending priorities and taxation interact. She has an article at the National Priorities Project we will discuss. Congress is funding the Trump regime's anti-immigrant violence. Then finally, we'll investigate why the so-called MAGA intellectuals are so angry when they have all the power and are backed by billionaire money, and speak with Laura Field, an associate with the Illiberalism Studies program at George Washington University and a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institution. She's written about the New Right for the New Republic, Politico, The Bulwark, and other publications, and is the author of the new book, Furious Minds, The Making of the MAGA New Right. And before we begin at the start of this new year, which will culminate in the fateful midterm elections in November, polls already indicate MAGA Republicans will lose the House and possibly the Senate. But we're up against a Trump-Miller presidency already drunk with power, and they will do anything to stay in power, having already demonstrated their contempt for the United States Constitution with Trump's January 6, 2001 coup attempt. They see over half of the country as their enemy and have a private army of loyal thugs ready to round up critics of the regime they label as communist lunatics. As Trump cowers, the media and his cronies buy up the mainstream press, Background Briefing will continue to expose this malevolent regime's fascistic machinations, providing a daily insight into the news as a massive coalition of people power is mobilized to bring about an end to this nightmare and usher in a new era of reform not seen since Nixon departed the presidency in disgrace. To help save America's 250-year-old democracy, we need all hands on deck, and you can make a tax-deductible donation to help us do our part at backgroundbriefing.org/donate or at publictruthmedia.org. And thank you. And joining us now is Stephen Marche, a novelist and culture writer. His recent books include The Next Civil War, Dispatches from the American Future, and The Last Election, co-authored with Andrew Yang. Welcome to Background Briefing, Stephen Marche.
Always a pleasure, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us. And you're in Canada, and the President of the United States had an unhinged rant on his Truth Social, which is further evidence that he's losing his mind or has already lost his mind. But for some reason or other, he's obsessed with Canada and ice hockey because he's saying that he's warning Canada about its the recent deals that Prime Minister Carney and Xi Jinping of China made. And he's saying that, quote, the first thing China will do is terminate all in caps, ice hockey being played in Canada and permanently eliminate the Stanley Cup. So, Stephen, how do you feel about
I'm
your
terrified.
national sport being.
I've never thought about it all that way. I didn't realize, it's impressive that the CCP in China, with all that they have on their plate, is giving such consideration to like the Canadian sport, the sports played in Canada when they conquer it. Yeah, I mean, it's just more insanity, isn't it? I don't think it's particularly more complicated than that. It's just. Yeah, we seem to be on a rotating schedule of obsessions. Like he keeps going. Like I think it'll be Greenland next, or maybe Venezuela, or possibly Cuba. Like there seems to be like a general, and then the Epstein files again. Like there seems to be a circuit of obsessions developing with him.
And he's also turning his attention to the Gordie Howe Bridge between Canada and the United States, between Detroit and Windsor, Ontario. It's a $4.6 billion international bridge, and he's threatening not to come to the opening. When's expected to open the bridge?
I believe it's relatively soon, like within a year. But it's one of those large scale projects that's been underway for a long time. I don't know what caused him to be obsessed with it now. It's very peculiar, the whole thing. I understand there's some he's going to give some a thing about aliens soon too. So I mean, who knows what we're dealing with at this point?
His complaint is that I believe the Canadians paid for it, but he says that the United States paid for it and that they owe him.
Well, I think his impression is that the United States paid for the whole of Canada, right? Like that was how I read it. Like that the United States, like that basically Canada belongs to the United States because the United States built it because we had trade deals with it, which enabled our prosperity to grow. That seems to be the logic. But I mean, the logic is a really strong word for what we're dealing with here. Like Canada built the bridge with the federal government money, and I believe the deal was with Minnesota, not with the U.S. federal government.
I think you meant to say Michigan, not Minnesota.
Oh,
right?
yeah, sorry, Michigan, pardon me. And it was that we will get a toll, and then we will earn it back. We will earn half back from the tolls, and then I believe it's sold on from there. So it was a very standardized like business. It was not particularly complicated, but it's it's just actually a nice way of building the whole country, our countries together. But he, of course, can't accept anything that would have reciprocity in it.
So, for the longest time, it's been apparent that Trump has been losing his mind. And, of course, it's this frightening specter is that you've got the replacement of J.D. Vance, and it's unlikely that he would invoke the 25th Amendment, or I'm not sure how he could get around that. He would have to be the first one to move and get the whole cabinet to agree that Trump has to go. So it's a little ways off. But interesting enough, there is some pushback against Trump coming from his own Republican circles. And there's a call in on C-SPAN the other day, a lifelong Republican from a lifelong Republican family called in and made really heartfelt comments about his absolute disgust at Trump. Let me just play that for you, Stephen. So
sure.
Get a feeling that as crazy as Trump seems from abroad, next door in Canada, he's also, people here in the United States are seeing him in that light too.
I am a registered Republican. My dad was the president of American Pipeliners Association, so I came by it rather naturally. Voted for the president, supported him, but I really want to apologize. I mean, I'm looking at this awful picture of the Obamas. What an embarrassment to our country. All this man does is tell lies. He is not worthy of the presidency. He takes bribes blatantly, and now he's being a racist blatantly. They were supposed to deport the dangerous criminals. They were not supposed to go after small children, storm schools, bring terror upon, the little kids and the women and children, not just the immigrants in the school. All the children are scared. This is not a decent man. This is not an honest man. He openly takes bribes. He's pathetic as a president, and I just want to apologize to everybody in the country for supporting this rotten man.
John, did you vote for him in all 3 elections?
I did. I was sucked into the stupidity of creating jobs, and there are no more jobs in New Mexico. Things are worse than they were before. You cannot find a primary care physician. Our governor just passed some laws to try to help. If you are a young physician, we want you in New Mexico. Come here. There's a great need for you.
And you've been listening to the clip that I just played of a caller, a Republican, lifelong Republican, calling into C-SPAN. So you're next door. Your prime minister made an extremely powerful speech at Davos, followed by Trump's totally incoherent, bitter, stupid rambling, which shocked the whole world, and the dollar tanked as a result. So from your perspective in Canada, do you think there's anything that you can tell the American people about how to resist this crazy man?
I think what the world is figuring out, but I think it's different when you're outside, when you're not in part of America, is that the only way to resist Trump is by maximum force, right? I mean, it's not good enough to like send a strong message. You have to like put troops on Greenland. You have to threaten to use the anti-coercion instrument. You have to, talk. You have to get nuclear weapons if you want to be really secure from lunatics like this. And those are the only responses that matter. But the response within the United States, I mean, it's very hard to know what to do, just simply because everything's accelerating so quickly, right? I mean, when I wrote The Next Civil War, like the decline that I saw, I sort of thought it would be like a mid-century thing. Like I thought it would be 2040 was the idea in my head. I mean, I never wrote it down, but like 2040 was sort of in my brain. It's accelerating so quickly now, the decline of American democracy, that it's really hard to know what to do. Like I have nothing but sympathies for Americans. Like they're not in an easy situation. It's not in a situation where it's very clear what to do, and the institutions are rotting away underneath your feet. It's a very hard situation. I think it's much easier to know what to do about it when you're on the outside.
But unfortunately, Trump is president, and we have a crazy man who has his finger on the nuclear button. The irony is, of course, that the Strategic Command launch officers in the silos under the prairies of America are rigorously tested psychologically to make sure they don't start a nuclear war. Yeah. Yet the guy that could actually start a nuclear war is not psychologically tested, when in fact it's pretty clear that he's losing it. So one of the things that is so troubling is that the favorite toy of the executive branch is the CIA. And it's very likely that Trump has already sent CIA officers into Greenland. There were some reports earlier that there were some strange people doing ridiculous stuff. So I don't know whether they were CIA or whether they were just a bunch of Trumpsters. But what do you know about the Alberta secession movement? Because there's been some rumors that Trump and MAGA has their fingerprints on the secessionist movement in Alberta.
Well, we know there's been discussions between American agents and the putative leaders of the separatist movement. It's very unclear what any of that amounts to. But, I mean, America, like it's the national security strategy articulated by the Pentagon, so not by Trump, by like a senior level of American administration, has called for the destabilization of Canada so that American hegemony can dominate the whole of the Americas. And this is absolutely of a piece of that. They are absolutely trying to interfere with our government, and they are trying to weaken our national solidarity as a method of control over us. Like that's not like in the future, that's happening right now. And so this is but we know this. Like we've known this for a long time. Like America is not our friend. Like they're really trying to destroy us. and we have to resist with maximum force. That is that's why we have apparently ruled out the use of nuclear weapons, like purchase of nuclear weapons, for this year. But I mean, there are already going to be much larger military forces, and it's not to be part of NATO. It's to be in resistance to the United States. Like, that's why we're going to increase our military budget. So, this is, and I would just say, this is not Trump. Like, this is Trump's guidance, but like, this is part of a large group of people who are the current administration of the United States. It's not just one crazy guy with his finger on the button. So yeah, I mean, you can imagine how we are moving with lightning speed to try and deal with these threats. And these really, they're not just threats, these new realities, but it's a very big turn for us. I mean, we were the closest ally of the United States for 200 years.
Well, it makes no sense, but surely Canadians must know that the majority of the American people don't feel this way. We have a minority government, but they do have the power.
It's not a question of the American people. Like, the American people are just fine. I think one of the things as a Canadian is like, it's not like Canadians are better people than Americans. Like, they're literally sometimes the same people. They have literally the same genetic stock. You know what I mean? It's systems. And like, what is happening is that the American system is collapsing. And in that time, this time of monsters, they're capable of anything. Right. So it's not a question of anything personal or anything like that, or that there's something wrong with Americans as such. It's that there's something deeply, deeply sick in the American system, and it is leading to all of this insanity. And it's not just Trump.
So is there any way out then for us here in the United States? I mean, obviously the imperative is to find a way to get rid of Trump. Then his successor is J.D. Vance, who's just as America first, xenophobic, hates Europe, and I imagine he hates Canada as well. He certainly went to Greenland and made a fool of himself.
Look, there's lots of ways to get out of this system. I mean, the one that I bring up, which is one that Andrew Yang brought up all the time, is open primaries. Like, if you had open primaries, you'd cut the insanity in the American political system by half. I mean, I really think it's almost that simple. But because the incentives are built in on both parties to not do that, because the American political system is driven basically as a massive fundraising organization, there's really no way to do that without a bunch of people losing their careers, and they're not going to do that. So there's lots of ways for America to get off this path. I just don't see anyone wanting to do it. And America is capable of immense change. There's no country in the world that is more capable of change than the United States, but you actually have to want to change to do it. It will not happen on its own.
But do you think that culture leads politics? And if so, the culture in this country definitely wants no more of Trump. All you have to do is look at the Super Bowl halftime where Bad Bunny captured the world and people loved it. And the Republican response was this pathetic, washed-up Kid Rock. So it's pretty clear that Trumpsters don't own the culture, that the culture's dead against them.
I mean, there are a couple of interesting ways of looking at that. One is, first of all, like, Trump has been very unpopular for huge amounts of time and has come back from it, right? I mean, his 34% of the population that's going to support him no matter what has not cracked, right? Another way to think of it is that Trump is popular culture. I mean, he is a reality television president. His cabinet is staffed by people who are, basically play doctors on television. I mean, the man in charge of the U.S. military has that job because he has superb hair, right? Like, he has unbelievably great hair, and he was a Fox News television host because of it. This is what we're seeing. The thing about Trump is that, unlike presidents, tend to emerge from the legal system or very occasionally from the military system, Trump has emerged from the entertainment system. He's actually emerged. He's a culture industry figure, right? That's what he knows how to manipulate. And so when you say that the culture leads politics, like, that's true, but it's not just the sudden twists and turns of, like, of people are into Bad Bunny rather than Kid Rock right now. That's how fashion works. Like skirts go down, skirts go up. Nothing stays the same. The question is, when you have a system run by its culture, when you have a system run on the terms of reality television, when you have the institutions and civil society essentially rotted out by social media, how do you have a meaningful politics of any kind? Like whoever's in power. And that I think is the sort of broader question. That's why I think focusing on Trump or like Gavin Newsom, it's kind of a red herring. The problems are structural. Problems are structural in the system of government. It's not working. And that's what needs to be solved, not like who's in power today.
Well, Stephen Marche, you've given me a lot to think about, and I can't say.
I know. It's always cheerful, right?
I've been cheered up.
You have a bottle of brandy handy every time you talk to me. That's
Okay.
a good piece of advice.
No, I think maybe Canadian whiskey. But
yeah, that's right.
I thank you for joining us. I appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
And again, I'll be speaking with Stephen Marche, who is a novelist and culture writer who has written for The Atlantic, The New York Times, The Wall Street Journal, The New Yorker, Esquire, and many other outlets. And his recent books include The Next Civil War, Dispatches from the American Future, and The Last Election, co-authored with Andrew Yang. We can take a brief station break. We're back with an assessment of the hearing today before the House Homeland Security, at which the heads of ICE and CBP face tough questions.
Your future stolen from behind closed doors. Busy leaders, busy breeding wars. The world is yours, but they don't let on. Always claiming that they're never wrong.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Lindsay, the Program Director of the National Priorities Project, where she oversees nationalpriorities.org. Her work on the federal budget includes analyses of the federal budget process and politics, military spending, and specifically how federal budget choices for different spending priorities and taxation interact. And she has an article at the National Priorities Project, Congress is Funding the Trump Regime's Anti-Immigrant Violence. Welcome to Background Briefing, Lindsay Koshgarian.
Thanks for having me, Ian.
Well, thanks for joining us. And today, before the House Homeland Security Committee, there was a hearing with testimony from the Customs and Border Protection Commissioner, the Immigration Services Director, and the Acting Immigration and Customs ICE Director. And there was some contentious exchanges. The head of ICE, Todd Lyons, at times refused to answer questions. He also complained about ICE being characterized as a bunch of Gestapo, to which New York Congressman Dan Goldman said, I have a simple suggestion. If you don't want to be called a fascist regime or secret police, then stop acting like one. What did you think of the hearings today?
Well, I think it's very welcome for Congress to be shining a light and asking questions on what ICE and its partner organization, but the Border Patrol are doing in the country right now. We've seen a tremendous increase of activity by ICE and Border Patrol all over the country, of course, most notably in Minneapolis. We've seen multiple deaths. Of course, the highest profile ones are the killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, but there have been 8 people who have died at the hands or in the custody of ICE and Border Patrol this year. And remember, we're only on early February, so that's saying a lot. Last year, there were 32 people who died in ICE custody. And we're seeing ICE target citizens, and we're seeing them target, immigrants who are going through the legal process, and, following all the rules. And we're also hearing talk of them potentially showing up at polling stations later this year and kind of their remit expanding. So I think it's critical that Congress is doing this kind of oversight. What I would just say is that it's not enough. Is that if members of Congress are serious about holding ICE and the Border Patrol accountable for these things, what they need to do is they need to hold them accountable through the funding.
Well, that's what's going on, right? Because DHS runs out of money on Saturday, don't they?
Yes, they do. So DHS runs out of regular funding on Saturday, but there is a pretty significant loophole here because much of DHS will run out of funding on Saturday because that's as far as Congress has approved funding. But ICE and Border Patrol, which are the two authorities that are overstepping their bounds so badly, they will not run out of money on Saturday because they have a huge tranche of funding that Congress approved for them last year that lasts until 2029. So they can keep operating even as the rest of Homeland Security. So TSA and FEMA and other parts of DHS will need to shut down. But ICE and Border Patrol will be able to keep going even if that funding runs out.
So at the hearings today before the House Homeland Security Committee, the chairman, the Republican chairman, Garabino of New York, he didn't mention Kristi Noem, but he clearly took a swipe at her, saying that Homeland Security officials are rushing to conclusion and that, quote, officials and elected leaders should not rush to judgment. Public trust and public safety go hand in hand. And of course, we know that Noem and others have referred to the victims of ICE shootings as being terrorists and domestic terrorists, etc. But I find that a little hypocritical, though, in a way. These Republicans complaining about ICE's behavior, they're the ones that gave them $170 billion, didn't they? I mean, DHS.
Yes, so this is the funding that I just referred to that they approved last year. It was $170 billion for the mass deportation agenda. That includes $75 billion for ICE and $58 billion for Customs and Border Protection. So those are the two agencies that are ICE and Border Patrol. So yes, they are the ones that gave them that funding. And, I think it's right to hold people like Kristi Noem accountable. It was right to hold Greg Bovino, the official who Trump just pulled out of Minneapolis after the killings of Renee Good and Alex Preddy, accountable. It's right to hold those people accountable, but it's not enough because the problem is that this isn't just a couple of bad apples at the top of these organizations. This is the strategy of this administration. They have, set deportation quotas. They have removed various types of accountability for ICE agents, telling them that they don't, in fact, need warrants for detentions when legally they do, telling them that they won't be held accountable for acts of violence. So, there's a lot more going on here, and it's coming, honestly, from higher up than even Kristi Noem.
Right, but this big, beautiful bill that they all signed on to, the Republicans, that's where the money came from. But the money came at the expense of healthcare and food, healthcare for most Americans and food for some of the neediest Americans. And of course, not only did they get this huge amount of money, they got $170 billion. Pentagon got $156 billion for immigration-related stuff. Then, as you mentioned, ICE got $75 billion and CBP got $58 billion. And of course, the other part of the big, bad, beautiful bill was that they took away health care and food, but they gave massive tax cuts to billionaires. So it's already disgusting before they get out of the gate, let alone what they've been doing with, 73,000 people now in detention. They say they've deported this year, since Trump's been in, 352,000. What do we know about those figures? Because one of the things that I find really disgusting, I talked to an immigration lawyer the other day and asked about how much money Core Civic and Geo Group are making out of detaining people, and they get paid for them every day that they have people in detention. They get money from the taxpayer. But she said that the other agenda is they're making life so miserable for these immigrants in these detention facilities that they will eventually waive their rights and accept deportation. And that's the strategy. It's a deliberate form of in effect, of torture, making things so horrible that they'll give up their legal rights and accept deportation. Is that your understanding?
That's absolutely the strategy. I mean, they've said so, and they've also said, they're trying to make life so unbearable for immigrants who, even who aren't detained, that we're hearing stories of people voluntarily self-deporting. The most, this may not be the most up-to-date figure, but last year they were circulating a figure that they said over 1 million people had self-deported. So just out of fear, and the way that a lot of immigrants are living, even some with legal status, right? I want to be very clear about that this is not just limited to people who are undocumented, but they're afraid to go out to the grocery store, they're afraid to take their kids to school, they're afraid to go to work because of what's happening, because there are people, regardless of legal status, but certainly those who are undocumented are faring terribly, who are being detained, being taken away from their families, being detained with their children. ICE is now holding an average of 170 children in detention each day, and those children don't have, in most cases, access to appropriate medical care. They don't have access to education. They are languishing in essentially prison, with, in many cases, their guardians, and in some cases without their guardians, especially in the cases of older children. So yes, absolutely, it's an intentional strategy to make life so unbearable, that they scare people out of the country. And just to underscore that it is not just undocumented people, they have removed legal status, multiple legal statuses, various temporary statuses, and people who are going through the asylum process, and people with various legal statuses. They have removed those statuses. They have increased the fees for each step of legal immigration processes to make it harder for people. And they have cut the budget for legal immigration. So, as we're looking at the budgets for ICE and Border Patrol, we also looked at the budget for US Citizenship and Immigration Services, that's where, if you want to apply legally for citizenship, that's where you would get it. That agency took a 23% budget cut from fiscal year 2024 to the current year. And that's at the same time that the budgets for ICE and Border Patrol effectively doubled.
So they're against all immigration, in effect.
That's right. That's right. It is. They're saying it's about the worst of the worst. That's not true. We know that the vast majority of immigrants currently in detention, have no criminal convictions, and an even much smaller percentage have criminal convictions of any violent crime. And we know that they're just targeting all immigrants, almost all immigrants. There are a few special categories, in some highly educated fields in demand from the tech industry, and in the bizarre case of white South Africans where they have made exceptions. But for the most part, it is clearly just an anti-immigrant agenda.
So today, before the Homeland Security Committee, the acting head of ICE, Lyons, said that ICE has made 379,000 arrests this year, this first year of second Trump term, and that included 7,000 suspected gang members and more than 14,000 known or suspected terrorists. I mean, can you believe that there are 14,000 terrorists that have been sent out of the country? Presumably there's a lot more in the country. That's the most ridiculous figure I've ever heard.
I think we have to take those figures with a gigantic grain of salt. If people remember that one of the first earliest activities of this administration was that they rounded up over about 250, mostly Venezuelan immigrants, and deported them without process to a prison, and a terrible, renowned prison, and without process, and yes, CCOT, and just on the basis that they said that they were gang members, but they did not produce any evidence of that. They weren't able to, convict any of those people. Many of those people ended up being brought back to the United States because courts found that this process was completely outside of the law. And so it's especially ironic given that their focus is supposed to be that they're enforcing the law. They're doing the exact opposite of enforcing the law. They're stretching and bending and breaking the law in every case that they can. So, so yes, I think those figures definitely have to be questioned. We've seen them call Renee Good and Alex Preddy domestic terrorists when, video evidence and all evidence to the contrary that they were just ordinary people. Yes, attempting to observe what ICE was doing. Yes, in Alex Preddy's case, stepping in to try to help another woman who was being directly attacked by those agents. But we've seen that they're not telling the truth about these things. So I think we have to take that with a huge grain of salt. And I also just want to point out that even if that number was anything close to the truth, 14,000 out of 350,000 is an extremely tiny share of those people. So what about the rest of them?
Right, but Lindsay, if there were 14,000 terrorists in this country, we'd have a terrorist attack every other minute.
Well,
I mean, they're very rare, and
I think those figures are quite certainly overblown, and unfortunately, we don't have any real idea of what the figures are. It's also worth bearing in mind that this administration has also said that people may be terrorists just on the account of speech. So especially in the case of pro-Palestinian activists, they have been willing to suggest that those people might be terrorists because they wrote an op-ed, for example.
Right. Well, just in the last couple of minutes, though, do you think you can shame these people? Because a couple of the Democratic Congress people today, before the Homeland Security Committee, basically, they asked both Scott and Lyons, the heads of ICE and CBP, whether they expect to get a presidential pardon at the end of their term. And Representative LaMonica McIver, she's already been arrested by ICE, by the way, she asked them, quote, "Do you think you're going to hell, Mr. Lyons?" So is this working? Is there any way to shame these people into behaving in a decent way?
I definitely don't know if there's any way to shame them, but I definitely think there is a way to pressure them, and more importantly, to pressure the members of Congress whose job it is to really oversee this and to enable it or to not enable it. Right. So I think that's where the focus needs to be, is on pressuring members of Congress who can, if those people need to be removed from their jobs or if they need to just have continual pressure so that they can't exercise the full amount of power that they're trying to exercise, that's where the focus needs to be.
Well, Lindsay Koshgarian, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you so much, Ian.
And again, I've been speaking with Lindsay Koshgarian, who's the Program Director of the National Priorities Project, where she oversees nationalpriorities.org. Her work on the federal budget includes analysis of the federal budget process and politics, military spending, and specifically how federal budget choices for different spending priorities and taxation interact. And she has an article at National Priorities Project, "Congress is Funding the Trump Regime's Anti-Immigrant Violence." We can take a brief station break, back investigating why the so-called MAGA intellectuals are so angry when they have all the power and are backed by billionaire money.
Is it a gun? Is it a knife? Is it a wallet? This is your life. It ain't no secret. It ain't no secret. No secret, my friend. You get killed just for living in your American scheme.
Welcome back. I'm Ian Masters, and this is Background Briefing, available 24/7 at backgroundbriefing.org. And joining us now is Laura Field, an associate with the Illiberal Studies program at George Washington University and a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institution. She's written about the New Right for The New Republic, Politico, The Bulwark, and other publications, and is the author of the new book, Furious Minds, The Making of the MAGA New Right. Welcome to Background Briefing, Laura Field.
Thank you so much for having me.
Well, thanks for joining us. And you have written that ideas have consequences and politics is downstream from culture. And that seems to be very much what's happening now in terms of the reaction to Bad Bunny's halftime show at the Super Bowl. If you compare the joyous display of Bad Bunny, who was seen by millions around the world and is massively popular, compared to the alternative that Turning Point USA put out with Kid Rock, etc. It would seem that the right may have the power, but the left has the culture.
Yeah, I think that's a fair understanding of the current situation. And I think conservatives in many respects would admit that. Part of their complaint against the left and against America really is that there's a culture that doesn't respect them and that sort of imposes their worldview on them. And so I think that's probably how they read the Bad Bunny concert as sort of the NFL of all places imposing a liberal worldview on them.
So is that why they're so angry?
It's one of the reasons. They're angry about a lot of things. I've written this book that is sort of charting the transformation of the Republican Party and its radicalization really at the upper echelon, so among the elites in the party. And one thing that they've been able to do is really exploit a lot of grievance among conservatives. And Trump obviously was able to do that really well, too. So I'm not really the book is quite critical of them, but I do think it's important to understand what they're angry about. And there's a lot to be angry about. I think we can all appreciate that.
Well, I've never understood why in this country liberals are on the defensive, because if you look at the history, they've done all the heavy lifting, ending slavery, bringing about women's rights, human rights, voting rights, civil rights, whereas the conservatives at every turn just said no. And yet somehow or other there is this defensiveness both on the left and the liberal side, and particularly amongst Democrats. What explains that?
Oh, that's such a great question. And I really agree with that impression of perplexity, because the left has just been, I think you're right, they've done a lot of the heavy lifting towards progressive change and towards things that almost everyone in America, except for maybe the real extremes, agrees with a lot of this change. But the current Republican Party, I mean, to explain that, I think it has a lot to do with just taking things for granted and taking that change, that historical change for granted. But I think one thing that's important to say is that the conservatives have been just extremely effective culture warriors. And so they've been really good at exploiting some of the vulnerabilities of liberal democracy and this weakness that you describe on the left, and sort of using it to gain momentum, to gain power for their own movement.
Well, one of the characters, excuse me, one of the characters in that you profile and write about, Christopher Rufo, he sort of made his bones attacking critical race theory. That's almost, it's hardly a clear and present danger. I mean, but he blew it up into a clear and present danger. And that's so.
That's a great example, I think, of what I'm talking about. Where he in particular, in a very calculating way, intended to create a catch-all phrase to describe everything that conservatives dislike about left-wing academia in particular, and then ascribe that to all of the left and all Democrats. And he was pretty successful, right? And so he takes things that, I think a lot of people could agree with, maybe about academia and not about critical race theory in particular, but he used that as a concept, as a catch-all phrase to describe everything critical, from postmodernism to, Marxist thought. And so he used that very effectively to launch this critique against higher ed, and obviously we've sort of seen the results of that. It's been a major part of Trump's efforts in this country across the red states and now at the national level.
So has anybody ever argued from the left that where would we be if, for example, LBJ hadn't made all of those reforms? Let's just take the case of civil rights. Where would we be in America today?
That's exactly the question that these guys don't ask themselves, right? We take a lot of these changes for granted. We take the historical circumstances that allowed for them for granted. And, the New Deal happened for a reason. The Civil Rights Act happened for a reason. Of course, sometimes things change, and things need to be adjusted, or there's overreach. But the right really has argued that all of that, the current right, I think that's the book's describing the MAGA new right. And so what they have refused to do is deal in sort of an adult, mature way with those changes, and instead they just say any change is basically a crisis of the Constitution, and that justifies all kinds of counter-revolutionary action so that we can kind of turn back the clock. Sorry about that.
It would seem, though, that the advantage that the right and the new right have is money and patronage from right-wing billionaires. Trying to raise money on the left is absolutely agonizing, particularly with it's not like there's a lot of George Soroses out there. And you're sort of up against all kinds of litmus tests and balkanization. Whereas it seems to me, I mean, I knew David Horowitz pretty well, and he used to be a lefty with ramparts during the Vietnam War in the 60s, and then made a radical switch to the far right and became kind of the prodigal son, which of course meant that they just threw money at him. So it seems to me that that's a part of the story, is the money trail. And all you have to do is look at Peter Thiel, who bought a Senate seat for J.D. Vance and then took him down to Mar-a-Lago to meet with Trump, where he bended the knee and apologized and said, Trump is my Lord and Savior, and the rest is history. Now he's vice president and likely to be president before we know it.
Yeah, I think the way I would put it is that there's a ton of money on the right, in particular for this sort of culture warrior, like a vector of politics. So on the left, you can fundraise for policy making, you can fundraise for, healthcare initiatives, research. There's all kinds of money, and for politics, for political candidates. But there isn't this sort of established institutional infrastructure where you can get an intellectual formation. I think that Horowitz was Stephen Miller's mentor, right, for many years. And there's a lot of wealth for a very different kind of politics and for the kind of movement building that we have seen, that I chronicle in my book, and that's been there on the right for a very long time.
Well, on the other side, of course, now the left is faced with the fact that one of their main stars is tied in with Epstein. So Noam Chomsky is pretty much disgraced, is he not?
Well, it's hard to know. I mean, you can look at her. His wife, I believe, has released a statement. The guy is very, very old, and I'm not sure. I mean, I haven't had a chance to fully go through it. I think that the guy who's really disgraced is Donald Trump and Steve Bannon, and I mean, obviously a plethora of others. So, I mean, it's all very ugly stuff. And I don't think Chomsky's an intellectual, certainly super important, but he's not an actual politician. And he's 97 years old. So I'm not too, I mean, they can use it, right? They can try to make that case that this is a huge problem for the left, but I'd be pretty skeptical about that.
Right. Well, there's no symmetry, as you point out, given Trump. And now it's pretty clear that the Epstein files were scrubbed by the FBI at Trump's direction before the DOJ even got to them. So, it's very doubtful. I mean, he is absolutely amazing how Trump has been one step ahead of the sheriff, and is always one step ahead of the sheriff. And
yes.
But since you've studied these so-called intellectuals that are the intellectual heft behind MAGA, Trump himself was hardly an intellectual. So is there any defection going on? I mean, how I kind of get a kind of Schadenfreude out of watching J.D. Vance twist in the wind, trying to justify what's happening, because he's the guy that, after all, talked about cultural heroin. Are you detecting anything amongst these people in having any kind of second thoughts about what Trump is doing? Because he's clearly a wrecking ball, to put it politely.
Yeah, I think what you're seeing is some fissures that are emerging that hadn't been there before. And so in the book, I chronicle the beginnings of the movement during the first Trump administration, where these people who were pretty fringe started getting together, having conferences and coordinating a little bit. And then under the Biden administration, they really coalesced and consolidated their power within the GOP, taking over institutions like the Heritage Foundation and so forth. And during that whole period, it was pretty well united. There was a lot of incoherence, like intellectually. They disagree about a lot of things, but they kind of rallied and came together. And then they got J.D. Vance in. They did Project 2025. It's been really quite incredible what they were able to achieve. But now that they're in power, There's the Epstein debacle. There's also this controversy over Tucker Carlson and just the real, the not quite takeover, but the Groypers coming into the movement, this horrible problem of anti-Semitism in many of these quarters, including at the Heritage Foundation. So you are really now starting to see some breakups, some people resigning from the Heritage Foundation and moving over to Mike Pence's think tank. So you do see a lot of movement. I think you're exactly right. JD Vance is really caught in a bind here because he wants to hold on to that very nasty base and the Groypers and Nick Fuentes and all of that. So he hasn't really been able to speak out with any force against Carlson. And so he's squirming, and because he still wants those donors. There are a lot of Republicans who care about this stuff. I think the average voter is not very pleased, and certainly the independents, the polling is very bad. So yeah, I agree. I'm also experiencing that same Schadenfreude. We'll see what happens. They've been so resilient and able to hold on to power, but I do think that things are looking very difficult for Trump right now.
So in terms of furious minds, one of the most furious of all is one of the architects of Project 2025, Russ Vought, who's also comes out of Hillsdale College. So what is driving these people in terms of their religiosity? Because any cursory look at the Bible would not indicate that you want to have your fellow citizens suffer trauma, which is what he said about wanting to cause trauma on government workers. So the anger and hatred there is so evident, but yet they consider themselves followers of the Prince of Peace.
I think that a lot of what we're seeing is people whose deep convictions and religious beliefs have been sort of taken over or overridden by these political ideologies and a different kind of political activism. And it's a kind of corruption, right? I mean, I won't speak to their personal faith because everybody has different ways of understanding, I guess, how faith should be played out in politics. And so I agree with you. It seems very anti-Christian. I don't think there's much of a question about that. But a lot of these people are thinking within these categories of politics, right? And it's highly partisan. And most of what they're thinking is that, or I'd say two things. They need that the ends justify the means. So ultimately, this is what America requires in order to sort of flourish as a country. And secondly, there's a sort of deeper conservatism here where a lot of the people I write about just believe that in order to have a healthy political order, you need one sort of transcendental understanding that unites the people and the culture. And I don't believe that, right? I think you can have pluralism. You obviously need to share some sorts of beliefs, maybe in the Declaration and so forth, and contest. But it's a democracy. You also have to have contestation. But this is a more reactionary outlook where they believe in these hard transcendental realities and truths, some of which they are getting from their religious outlooks. So it's a very radical way of looking at the world that I think tips into radical action on the ground and traumatizing action. So I think it's very sad, but I think that part of what's going on here is this intellectual radicalization.
But aren't they enabling plutocracy, and aren't they also in many ways being underwritten and supported by plutocrats?
Oh, absolutely. I mean, but I think that what I'm trying to shine a light on in the book is the extent to which, genuine conviction and fanaticism is part of the picture here. So that, people's drives or what motivates them is obviously complicated, and it's mixed up in politics with greed and power seeking. But I think in a lot of the instances, and again, I'm not talking about all of MAGA, I'm talking about a slice of this sort of upper crust DC elite. And they, I think, are quite fanatical. And so that's what the book is trying to shine a light on and show, because I think it's hard for a lot of us to understand that.
And so much of it is the anger manifests itself in trolling, and it's sort of infantile in many ways. I'm just wondering about what the countervailing emotions could be. I mean, I talked about Bad Bunny in the beginning of this conversation. Where do you think the sort of energy and anger, apart from the fact that they're underwritten by billionaires. But still, you know, Charlie Kirk and others have really shown they've got a lot of energy, and they're really good at social media and good at getting their message out. What can the left learn from these angry right-wingers?
Well, I think they can learn to deal with them more directly and confront them on some of these, on the intellectual plane, for one thing. That's not easy. And on the cultural plane, I mean, I think the liberals have a cultural advantage here, and they should not be on the defense. They should be proud of what they represent, and I think a little less apologetic. But I think also, you know, sometimes that also involves just a direct confrontation. You know, go on Fox News, make the argument. Part of what the right has been exploiting is a refusal to engage and a refusal to kind of directly address some of these arguments. And so I wish that more people would be willing to take them on and show that they're not actually very good, and they can be contested and they can be defeated, because I think they've been sort of riding this weird wave, and liberals have shied away a little, including the Democrats, right, have shied away a little too much, and should be more direct.
So, Laura Field, just here in the last couple of minutes, is there any invocation that you might be able to offer here? Why our listeners need your book? Because it's a pretty left-wing audience, I would suggest. Mm-hmm. So I don't want to suggest that this is an exercise in masochism. I think it's an exercise.
No, I hope not. I mean, I'm on the left too, I guess, is the first thing I'd say. But my background is in conservative political philosophy and sort of the great books tradition. And so I kind of understand the weird language a lot of these people are speaking, which you might be shocked by if you're on Twitter and you're seeing all these allusions to Rome and Sparta. I'm sort of, okay, I get this. I speak that language. So that's where I'm coming from. I think the book helps us. If you've been perplexed by the radicalism of the second administration as contrasted with the first, my book can really help to explain that. I was trying to do a few different things with the book, mainly to kind of explain and just profile the people involved, show how the movement came together as a movement and coalesced to take over the party. I also wanted to show the allure of and the seductive quality of some of this, which, again, I'm not a fan of a lot of the people I'm writing about, but I do understand why some of this is appealing. They are appealing to people's, you know, yearnings for meaning. Some of it's quite deep and interesting, and they're addressing quite directly some of the dissatisfactions of like late modernity. So I think there's a lot of rich stuff here, even though they're taking it in what I think is a terrible direction. And the third thing I wanted to do with the book was just to show how radical it is and how extreme, because I think it is really dangerous. And it's quite a bit, I think one of the reasons why Trump is losing popularity right now, and Vance too, is that it's quite a bit more extreme than the American voters are prepared for or were ready for. So I think the book really explains that part of it too.
Well, Laura Field, I thank you very much for joining us here today.
Thank you so much for having me, and good luck with the drive.
Well, thank you. And again, I've been speaking with Laura Field, who's an associate with the Liberalism Studies program at George Washington University and a non-resident fellow at the Brookings Institution. She's written about the New Right for the New Republic, Politico, The Bulwark, and other publications, and is the author of the new book, Furious Minds, The Making of the MAGA New Right. And this has been Background Briefing. I'm Ian Masters, and I'd like to thank producers Graham Fitzgibbon, Asher Price, and Sasha Linden-Cohen. If you missed any of today's program and would like to explore our vast archives, you can find us at backgroundbriefing.org, where we include extended interviews, searchable by topic, and have made it easier for you to sign up for daily email updates and provide links to resources, articles, and books discussed on the program. Also, you can find links there to subscribe wherever you get your podcasts, and we highly encourage your ratings and reviews on these platforms. Find us on Twitter, Blue Sky, and Facebook at Ian Masters Media, and our new social media manager, Luke Susswood, is also posting highlights from the show on YouTube, TikTok, and Instagram at Ian Masters Media. So please do help us reach more listeners by sharing this program with friends, family, and colleagues. And to help sustain this program into the future and ensure it remains free to all, please take a moment to support us by going to backgroundbriefing.org/donate and/or at publictruthmedia.org, where your tax-deductible donations, large and small, keep us broadcasting. And I'll be back tomorrow with another Background Briefing at backgroundbriefing.org. Bye for now.
one more light goes